airports. Those, of course, that includes the around 38 airports that we have across the country. Now, let's just begin with this particular conversation, and I don't begin with you, Dr. because as an economist, I don't know what you make of this particular deal, because the president talked about, this public-private partnership being the way to go. And of course, we do agree on that is the way to go in terms of, infrastructure and all that. But just to begin with, what do you make of this particular deal? Because it has raised a lot of eyebrows.
Thank you very much. The problem with this whole project at this point in time, it is very opaque. There is limited data, there is limited information. Actually, even the two houses of parliament, they are agitating to be supplied with information, starting from the memorandum of understanding or any contract or any proposal that was given by Adani to the Kenyan government. That one is yet to be tabled to the public. But commenting generally with the information that we have, the suggestion to lease the JKIA for 30 years to Adani, I think it is far-fetched. And if we look at the issue of a return on investment, if I construct a house today, a building which is a rental, I should be able to recoup my initial investment in terms of capital within a maximum of 10 years. Because the rate of return is about 10%. Okay. So what that means is that for that years, it is far-fetched. And we are also talking about Adani pushing to be guaranteed a rate of 18% return on the investment. 18%, which is almost like 20%, basically it means within 5 years, 20 times 5, it goes to 100%. Within 5 years, Adani will have recouped their initial investment. So the other 25 years, it will be purely profits on Adani. Because they are pushing 18%, we invest 246 billion, and we want to be paid at a guaranteed rate of 18% per annum. The other problem that I see with that guaranteed rate is that Adani will not be compelled to even bring efficiency to the operations of JKIA, because their pay has been guaranteed. Okay. Their pay is not anchored on performance. It is already guaranteed. If the government, if the airport does not generate income as anticipated, their pay is guaranteed. So I really wonder which people go out there to negotiate contracts on behalf of the Kenyan government, because we even recently saw the issue of Eurobond. We are contracting Eurobond at a rate of 11%, where smaller economies like Benin and Cote d'Ivoire, they were given Eurobond at a rate of 8.5% per annum. And as we are a larger economy at 11%. So I feel there's a lot of opaqueness, lack of transparency, lack of accountability. Okay. And that's what has led the Kenyan government to continue losing money, even as we continue to service SGR, because SGR and also Nairobi Expressway was done in a form of a public-private partnership model. Okay. But the information is never out there to be interrogated by Kenyans.
Fair enough. Before I go to Akili, Mr. Mudhira Kariara, you're part of, you remember back in June, was it in July, the youth had threatened to storm the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport because of this particular deal, because the feeling on the ground is that Kenya is sort of selling its airport to the Adani Group, the Indian firm. The president was speaking in Mombasa County during the town hall forum, said, and I just want to quote him, and he said, kuna watu wanasema anataka kuuza airport, which is a public and an iconic facility. And he said, am I a madman? From where you sit, if at all the red flag was not raised, because this particular issue was raised in the wake of the Gen Z demonstrations, just after the invasion of Parliament, and the Reject Finance Bill movement and all that. Like Dr. has talked about, there's been a lot of secrecy surrounding this particular deal, which in itself is a red flag. From you as part of those who have been calling for more transparency from the government, because the biggest concern is there's no transparency. There seems to be a bit of, you know, holding up of information in regards to this particular deal. So what is your biggest concern? Because Adani is a firm that has its own fair share of, what do I call it? Fair share of controversy, because they've been accused of issues of, you know, even including tax evasion. But they're saying that if at all they take this particular, you know, deal and take over operations of this particular airport, the profits will jump from around 21 billion from 2025 to 37.37 billion in 2030. I don't know if, from where you sit, that is, you know, the way we need to go in terms of taking over the deal, or still you have issues with that?
Well, you mentioned that the president asked if he's a madman. And I believe when an idea crosses your mind, it's actually because you've considered it before. During the Gen Z protests, there is a number of protesters who, out of their own analysis, came out with placards asking, "Au Ruto ni mwenda wazimu." Actually, there has been a song that has been like, "Ruto ni Okay?
Okay, fair enough.
So him responding to that is because maybe he's looked at his track record, the steps he's taken lately, and he's realized that people are interrogating that. So we should actually be invited into that debate now more seriously than before. About this deal, number one, it's not the first where information has been very scanty. You remember we had the SGR deal, which initially had a low figure that Kenyans felt we can handle this. And so they supported the initiation of the SGR deal, but then by the time we were done with it, we didn't have a line from Mombasa all the way to Malaba. And then the cost and the other details were very patchy. To date, we don't have the whole disclosure. There is the Nairobi Expressway, which is shrouded in a lot of mystery. Now, we are entering into another more critical infrastructure. JKIA is not in the same league as the SGR or the Nairobi Expressway. This is a very strategic asset. And to make it worse, the deal is a privately initiated partnership. It's like I'm coming to you and telling you, I see you have this problem and I can solve it for you. It's not the Kenyan people that approached the world and then out of a competitive process settled on a particular entity to come solve the problem. So this is a deal that should be put out there through the organs that we already have. Number one, KAA is not a loss-making company. It's an organization whose cash flow is described as healthy. So if it's funds they needed to enhance their operations, they can get that from any financial institution out there. And how much are they asking for? Or has Adani proposed to give 250 billion? When Kenya needed money, we even went and got the Eurobond at very exorbitant rates. So it's not for lack of avenues to get funding for our projects. It's just that some people have seen an opportunity to own a Kenyan asset, and they are using this opportunity. So Parliament has asked for information. That information has not been forthcoming. Kenyans issued a notice to go occupy JKIA, and they actually attempted. Yesterday, Kenyans occupied JKIA, and there are calls out there that if the deal is not called off, they are actually going to implement an Occupy JKIA, which will stall operations. McHugh, the president is not in the country today. For him to come back, he will need that airport. And I pray that action is taken before Kenyans choose to go and occupy JKIA before he jets back.
Okay, fair enough. Wakili, Mr. Mudhira Karera has talked about, you know, this particular private proposal. Because in itself it's suspicious, because how does, just a private firm come to you as, a government and say, listen, we have an idea that we want to do this and this within your country. Now, according to Kenya Airports Authority, acting managing director, Mr. Henry Ogoy, he said they resorted to this particular type of deal and avoided the, of course, competitive process because they were trying to save time. That in itself is really, really suspicious. And in fact, he goes ahead to say that Adani will pull out in 6 months' time if the deal will not be sealed. Why the rush?
You see, this is very interesting. You have Ethiopia and Rwanda who are working on their airports, and they have not decided to give away the running of their airports to any private-owned firm. This is the worst deal you can ever enter into. It doesn't even make sense if you ask me. Because what do we stand to gain? We stand to lose a lot as Kenyans as opposed to what we are gaining. We talk about an investment of 249 billion for 30 years. Make that make sense. It doesn't make sense. And it talks about a runway for 97.5 billion. If you look at this issue, for example, without Kenyans themselves raising this issue, we'll never be discussing the Adani deal. And that tells you Parliament has failed. Parliament has lost its duty to the people to represent us, to legislate on our behalf, to oversight on our behalf. What do they do as members of Parliament? Now they are with us asking for information. After this thing has been brought to the limelight, and at first when this thing was being discussed by Kenyans, we were being told that's a lie. Such a thing is not happening. There are no documents. And then all of a sudden, we got documents. Then they started saying, oh, by the way, it's a good deal. We're trying to make sure JKIA is competitive. You see, the worst thing, if you look at this deal, for example, it talks about an arbitration clause is there, that in case of an issue, the arbitration will happen in London. Do you know how expensive an arbitration process is? It's very expensive. As a certified mediator, I believe a mediation process would be faster and less expensive. You get me? You move forward and you look at the demands the Adani have. One of the demands is the government cannot construct a competing airport for 30 years. Yes. The same government is prohibited from upgrading the 38 airports. So, are you trying to tell us that we'll only have one good airport, then the rest, like Mombasa, ibaki venye iko? Who is that deal supporting, us or the private firm? You ask yourself, what do we stand to gain? We stand to lose a lot. You talk about they'll pull out in 6 months. It's like what Morara is actually showing us right now. You get into a deal, we launch something, it's never done, then they go for redress in court, we pay for things that were never done, money was paid up front, money is lost. So we keep losing money as a country, and we keep doing the same thing, expecting different results. So who's gaining? It is the political class that is entering into this deal. Because whether we like it or not, there is someone in the political class who's benefiting from this deal. Because it's not you and I. This deal does not make any sense. Adani himself has a lot of issues. The amount of projects they manage incur losses. So what is this miracle they're going to bring to JKIA? And then you have the issue of the staff. Now the staff are saying, we have not even been consulted. We don't even have documents. We don't even know what we are being told to discuss about.
Before you talk about the stuff, Wakili, I don't want to engage Daktari, because as well there's the issue of, like Wakili has talked about, there's the issue of, taxpayers getting all the burden, because at the end of the day, the government will have to cover losses of, termination of contracts and all that. Now, why would the government decide that through this deal they will transfer, they will have to cover, they'll transfer the losses that has been incurred from the termination of, the current contracts, and ensure to see that, Adani takes over and ensure that Kenyans will have to shoulder this particular burden, and even more, because, like he has rightly put it, the government cannot construct a competing facility for 30 years. 38 airports across the country will not be, we'll just say, they will not be under the Kenyan government. They'll be under, if anything has to happen, they have to consult Adani. It has to be the consent of Adani. Yes. I mean, make it make sense.
There's no it can make sense. There's no it can make sense. And I feel so sad for our country. And at this point, I would want to say the person who is anchoring his progress on the development of this country economically is in for a rude shock. And I would want to say that we should trust our own philosophy to progress in life and not the economy of this country, because basically I don't see where we are going. And I see it's like a small child who is blowing a balloon. It keeps increasing, but it cannot increase forever. It will burst at some point. And this is how the economy of Kenya, I see it is sinking. Just the other day, let me mention about KQ, because it is related to KIA. KQ has a debt of 83 billion that has been guaranteed by the government of Kenya. KQ is struggling to pay it, and the government of Kenya now has added that 83 billion as part of the public debt that the country has. The government of Kenya only has 48% shareholding of KQ. The other 52% of KQ is owned by private investors and companies. Yeah. So you wonder why the government of Kenya is wasting the taxpayers' money by guaranteed a debt by KQ. So if we come now to the issue that you have raised about leasing of JKIA for 30 good years, I think, I don't know. It is the worst economic decision that any leadership or any government can make, because by saying that for the next 30 good years, and let me put into perspective the 246 billion that Adani will be investing in the upgrading of JKIA. In the year 2002, when President Moi read his final budget, the budget of the day was 250 billion. For the entire country, the funding of education, funding of defense, funding of security, 250 billion. That's what we are talking about. Adani will be using to just invest in JKIA and for that years. And this investment, they are not doing an airport from scratch. It is an already existing...
It's a matter of refurbishment.
Refurbishment. Yeah, yes. And when we go to Rwanda, a similar arrangement has been done by the Qatar Airways and the Rwandan government at a cost of 2 billion USD. Yes. And that one is, they are starting from scratch. And Ethiopia is 6 billion USD. And Ethiopia is 6 billion USD. But for Kenya, it is only a mere upgrading. We already have so much infrastructure there. So why should it cost that much? Okay,
fair enough. Mr. Muthiora, they're saying this particular deal, and the government has been holding meetings with Adani for the past 6 months, but this matter came to light, I think, a couple of months ago. Yeah. And that of course, reveals a lot of secrecy that we're talking about, because nobody knew about this particular deal. But even more concerning is that, Adani will not be answerable to anybody, because the Kenya Airports Authority will be answerable even to the Kenyan Parliament on behalf of Adani.
Yeah.
Why should they be? Should they not be held accountable themselves? Why should Kenya Airports Authority be answerable on their behalf?
Look at how this deal is being set up. The parent company has set up a subsidiary from Dubai. Yes. And then that subsidiary is the one that is setting up another one in Kenya. What's happening here is the dealers in the ruling elite in Kenya are the owners of these subsidiaries. Let's call it what it is. So in essence, we do not have Adani being invited to do anything in Kenya. What we are doing is we are transferring ownership from the Kenyan people to a few Kenyan individuals who are connected politically. That's what's going on, which is why the deal cannot be done procedurally. We do not have a crisis in Kenya with regard to managing our airports. Yes, we have leaking roofs, but that does not call for us selling the future of this country. So we have to call this for what it is. If Adani want to go because the deal won't be done in 6 months, I can guarantee you that there are Kenyans out there who are ready to occupy JKIA for the next 6 months so that this deal does not go through.
This deal is supposed to start in November, because Adani is expected to take over operations by November this year.
Yes, but then there is leeway that this deal has to be done in 6 months. So November is very soon, and I can guarantee you that Kenyans will not allow for this deal to go through.
No, fair enough. Wakili, you raised concerns about the funding. You talked about 246 billion shillings investment, rather, that will be spread across 3 different phases. And of course, the first phase includes the 97.5 billion that will be used for the construction of a new terminal by 2029. Now, Prime CS Musalia Mudavadi, while of course acting as the CS for all dockets after President William Ruto fired his entire cabinet, said there is no deal and nobody is selling the Kenyan airport. But he said if at all that will happen, then it has to be or go through the consent of the National Assembly. And in fact, he said, and the President has reiterated, that indeed we need private funding to ensure that Jomo Kenyatta International Airport is modernized and is up to standard. But question is, if at all it's an open process, a transparent process, why not go for an open tender process? Because like you've said, there could be Kenyan farms, there could be local farms that can be able to do this particular deal. Why not engage everybody across board? Why just decide that Adani will take it and this is through a private initiated process, PIP?
I'll start from where you started. The Prime Cabinet Secretary, actually an constitutional office, said that there is no such a deal. He lied. Because it came out to be, and here we're discussing it. Next question. The PIP avoided a competitive process. He brings it out. Irregularity. Someone is benefiting. That is why it wasn't competitive. Number 2, Parliament involvement. All right? Parliament has no say. After it actually, Parliament made an error. When they amended the privatization bill in Kenya, to make the executive sell our parastatals without the approval of Parliament. So we as Kenyans own parastatals, but they can be sold at any time by anyone because they have the approval without us giving the express approval. Number 2, we talk about the 6 months working between KIA and Adani, right? Now the question is, as they have been working for 6 months, and we are being told later by the Cabinet Secretary that there's no deal, where these reports are not in Parliament, so where are these reports? All right? That shows you where Parliament is sleeping. Number 3, it goes ahead and says, the same deal, that KAA, not Adani, KAA will be answerable to Parliament, not Adani.
That is the question.
So you are managing our airport, but not answerable to us.
Exactly the question I asked.
So that brings out the issue of there is someone benefiting from this deal, and they're just covering it up with saying it's a PIP. PIP to whose interest? You get? So it actually shows if KA is the one that is answerable to Parliament, why not let KA manage? Why is Adani managing our facility without being answerable to us? So if you have a question, and KA come and say, oh, by the way, remember during Chebukati's time, he once told us, oh, serve as Jama wa Melala. So if KA come and says, and by the way, we don't have the information, we have to wait to be supplied for information. So why are we giving you a facility that you cannot be answerable to? So that brings about the issue of the PIP. It's showed in secrecy. We have to find out for ourselves as Kenyans, and that stinks of a scandal in the making. They talk about the 6 months you talked about. If there's no deal, they'll go away. So I would like to understand, how much will they take as they're going away? They'll take us to court for arbitration, as they say, to be in London. The amount of money we'll lose will be more than what they plan to invest. And who will take the money? Who will benefit? Because we find ourselves in a situation or in a country where people buy shell companies, act like it's a PIP, but we are paying them for money that they took from us, being political figures. And we have to be honest. You see, when Kenyans demand for information, it is their right. The Constitution speaks about access to information. And the fact that you put this in secrecy, it stinks to the highest level. Fair enough. So we find ourselves in a situation where, like I told you, this is the worst deal you can ever get into. And for 30 years, 246 billion for 30 years, that's a scam of the highest order.
Well, fair enough. A scam of the highest order, like Wakili Nordin Kagai says. On that note, just take...
Before you go and break, the worst thing... They are now finalizing the negotiations. So what is remaining is implementation in November.
Exactly what I said, because the deal, it's in its tail end. So we'll be just taking a brief breath, and then we'll be back to talk about, what Adani will be granted in terms of operations, because that includes the issue of, fee collection, tax exemptions, and of course, land access here in the country. That will be immediately after this brief breather. Don't go away.